Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Exploring My City Through Art. And today we are going to paint watercolor birds, watercolor Audubon birds. And so you're going to learn all about John James Audubon and his beautiful watercolor birds and the link that it has with New Bedford and why New Bedford is known for their Audubon bird collection. And to explain it to you and to give you a little information is Ali Copeland from the New Bedford Free Public Library. And she has all sorts of information for you about these Audubon birds. And now, so you're going to listen to it first, and then we are going to do this exercise. So get all your things ready. We are going to be painting, so you need paintbrushes, you need paint. We are going to use acrylic paint because you can water it down and make it appear just like watercolor paint. So you could use your acrylic paint, you could use your poster paint, okay? And so that's what we're going to do. So get all of your materials together, listen to the video that Ali did for us, and then come back here. And we are going to begin our watercolor Audubon birds. Okay, so today I chose this Audubon bird to do, and it's called the brown pelican. It wasn't in some of the examples that you saw on the video, but I wanted to choose a bird that was just an image that had a single bird in it that's large, because some of the images have many birds, and I don't want you to get confused or, feel intimidated that there's so many things to draw. And believe it or not, we're going to draw this. And if you think you don't know how to draw, there is a great, easy, and effective way of learning how to transfer something to another page. And it is the grid technique, And so what you're going to use is everyone is going to get an image of the bird, a colored image, so that we can, when we're ready to paint, we can look at the colors and recreate those colors. And you're going to get a black and white photocopy of the same bird. The reason I'm doing the black and white photocopy is because we are going to draw grid lines on it that will help us to draw this. But I don't want to put lines on our nice colored copy here, okay? So that we can put aside, and we're going to use this one. Okay, now what we're going to do is that we're going to divide this into a grid. We're going to divide it into a grid. And the way we're going to do that is just by folding it in half. See, in half. Then you're going to fold it again, even edge to edge, so that you get quarters. And I'm just going to fold it one more time. Now with the grid technique, you could just fold it once and you would just have 4 quarters. And then the more you fold it and the more grids you have, is the easier it is to follow along and draw. So now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? And then you can take your pencil and go over, or pen, and go over these lines where you see the creases, wherever you see the creases, just so that you see those lines very clearly. Okay? So wherever you have the creases, that's where you're going to do your lines. Now I did one for you already, and I used Sharpie just so that you can see where we have divided it. Okay? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Good. Now we have another piece of paper, and the paper is going to be the same size. Okay? To make it easier for us, we're using the same size paper. But you can use this technique, and you can use a larger size page. Once you grid the blank paper the same way, it will work out. Okay? So it's proportional. But what we're going to do today is the same size paper to make it very easy for us. Now this is going to be our final paper where we're going to do our watercolor drawing. we don't want to bend it. We don't want to bend it because then we finish the drawing and the painting, we're going to have all these creased lines. So what we want to do is, you could just make little marks. You could measure it, so you measure half and half, or you just take your gridded paper and I pull it down a little bit and I make a little mark here. See that? So that shows me that this line is the center, and I do it on the bottom as well. So I made a little mark here and a little mark here, and then I can take my ruler and join it. So that's the first half. And then I'm going to make these marks here. One is a really simple, easy way where you don't have to measure. Push it over there. So I'm just leaving a space so I could make these marks. So once you have these two opposite marks equal, then you can draw the lines. Boom. Like that. And like that. So we have our brown pelican with the gridded lines, and we have the gridded lines here. So what's going to happen when you do this, you are going to follow. Now, I know in this one, we have lots of other things around us. So we have leaves, we have a branch of a tree that the brown pelican is on. I want you to just focus on the bird alone first. After, then you can add these in. So just focus on this bird. And so what I like to do, so we start. Okay, so you decide where you want to start. I usually like to start from the top and then come down. So I'm going to start from the head. Look at this. Right? So I have my paper here. It's going to be echoing it, right? He's going to start from the head. So that means the head of the bird is going to be right here. Look and see what section of this block, this whole block here, what section of it is here, and then draw it in. Follow what you see here, okay? I know, even if you think you can't draw, you can do this once you follow what is in the block. So whatever is in this block will go here. Whatever is in this block will go here. What is in this block will go here. You seeing what I'm saying? Good. Sometimes some students fold it so they don't get confused. Look at that. So this part of the head will go right here. I've seen students do that so they don't have to see the whole thing. So I'm going to do it. So this is the empty space. This part is where the head begins. I'm going to think, okay, the head is around, estimated around here. And you can also divide this again to make it easier for you. So, and think of shapes. That's a curve. That's a curve right here. And then we have some of this, the feathers of the hair coming down. We have the eye. So you're following what you see, right? Any shape, anything that you see, you're following it. Okay? So I'm just doing the head alone. So you can do it like that, fold it if you don't mind. Okay, I'm going to continue now. This part of the hair curves, comes like that. All right? Then the beak. Look at how the beak goes. Look right here. The beak goes all the way down to this line at a diagonal, and I'm going to do mine diagonal all the way down. So this is going to take you a little bit of time. You're thinking of shape. You're thinking of shape, reproducing shape. Okay? Reproducing shape in each of these sections. Don't worry if it gets a little off. but just try and see, look at each thing as a shape, not as, oh, an eye or a feather or the back of the head. It's a shape. Is it circular? Is it triangular? Is it oblong? Okay, so take your time, and piece by piece, you are going to develop this. And believe me, it is going to turn out the same, because if you follow what's in these, it might be a little off, but it's mainly, it gives you a nice idea of what is supposed to be where. Sometimes if you just freehand it and decide to draw the whole thing, you might make it too small or you might make it too large. But when you follow it like this, you're going to make it more or less the same size. Okay? So start doing that and let's see what you got. Okay, so we are ready to go. And I have my grid all drawn out, if you can see it. So this is the one I had, my black and white copy with the grid, and I followed block by block, copying what I see, block by block. That's how you do the grid technique. And it works if you take your time, okay? Sometimes, some parts, and look at what I did for this one, I divided it even further. So when you divide it even further, then you can see what falls in what area and follow that, okay? So even if it's a little off, this is much better than if you were to do it freehand, and then you might end up getting it too small or too large, okay? So it's a really good technique. Take your time and do this. So you're going to have your pencil drawing. Now remember, this is watercolor. We don't use watercolor heavy and dark, and so you will see the pencil marks under it. So make sure you have your pencil marks are light, okay? Dark enough for you to see. I did it a little darker so you can see, but try not to dig into your page when you draw or even when you make the grid lines, because remember, we call these grid lines construction lines, and those lines will be erased after, okay? In fact, once you have your bird, you can kind of start erasing some of the grid. Not the bird, but just the grid, the excess. So if it's a little dark, just kind of take out some of that, okay? Now, there's some watercolor artists that actually like to see the pencil underneath. So it's all preference, but I'm sure some people don't like. So it depends. You will decide, okay? So now we're ready. We have our colored version because we want to see what colors we need to do our watercolors. Now, a watercolor technique, as I'm saying, we are doing acrylic paint. So I have my acrylic paint here. If you have watercolor, wonderful. Use your watercolor paints. If not, you can use acrylic paints or you can use poster paints, okay? So how we make this into a watercolor effect is that we make washes. And a wash is a little bit of pigment or paint and a lot of water. So I don't know what type of paints you have. You can use all the paints. If you have a set that has many different colors in it, you can use those colors. But I always love to teach students how to mix color. I always talk about primary and secondary colors. These are primary colors here. You mix two primaries together and you get a secondary color. And I know all of you know that because in all the exercises I do, we talk about that a lot. But you will see as it goes by, you will see, okay? So I would like you, if you can follow along with me and just use primary colors for the whole thing, or you can put out different colors that you want. Now here, I'm not adding water to these. I'm taking out a little bit of paint, putting it in another pot, and adding water to make washes, okay? To make a wash. Now let me just show you quickly. Here is an example, a student example of primary colors, right, with a watercolor effect. So as you can see, light here to dark, light to dark, light to dark, okay? Blue, yellow, and red. In using watercolors, you always want to start light as you can go. And you will see when we start with painting our bird, okay? So light to dark. Also, this is another example here from students of a color grid, and we have two primary colors, yellow and blue, meet together, mix together to form green. Blue and red to form purple, and red and yellow mixed together forms orange. Okay? And I want you to see that this is very different. And when we paint this kind of grid with acrylic paint, we're not painting in a flat way. This watercolor technique has a lot of water in it. So as you can see, the water moves and it bleeds into one color, into another color. It creates shapes. And I want you to see that what you're seeing right here is not a bad thing. Watercolor artists love to see things like that. Okay? When you look at the way the water is moving and pulling the color with it, that is a lovely effect. So when you get that, don't feel, oh no, it's not a good thing, and try and go over with thick paint. No. So the technique, the watercolor technique, is very important. Let me show you an example the student did of a flower. But what I want to show you is like all these things where the water bleeds one color into the another, where some parts are dark and then fade out into light, right? Where other parts had a lot of water in it and it just puddled and dried, so it dried a little darker. So you're going to get some interesting effects with this watercolor technique. Okay, so let's begin. So we have a palette, 3 primary colors. Okay, we have some water, and then your brushes. I would like you to have like 3 brushes, a small one for details, a medium one, and a larger one. So you look and see what you have and use that. But always remember, large area, use a larger brush. A small area, use a smaller brush. And a really small detailed area, a tiny brush, a tiny detailed brush. Okay? Okay. So now we're going to begin. Look at our colors carefully and see what colors you need. Okay? I see yellow, I see white, see browns, different types of browns, dark browns, light browns, greens, different types of greens in the plant behind, and different types of browns in the tree trunk. Okay? Now, with watercolor, what we like to do is start with the lightest color first. Lightest color first and get darker and darker. But you starting with a wash. So my lightest color is going to be yellow. And let me just tell you about the areas that appear to be white. In watercolor, this is another rule of watercolor. You do not use white paint. I don't know if you've seen. If you see some watercolor sets, especially by artists, watercolor artists, they don't have white in there. They don't use white. They use the white of the paper, okay? And also the wash. You make it really light if you want it light by adding more water, but not by adding white paint. So let's try and do it that way and avoid using the white, okay? If you think you want to use it, yes, you can. Make sure you use it in a wash. But let's try and not do that. We'll just use light colors and avoid using white. So the first one, light color that we're going to do is this yellow. So anywhere you see yellows, you're going to put it in. Put a little bit like this so you can see both. All right. Okay, so this brush seems good for me to fill in. Look at my yellow. Now, I'm not just going into the yellow and painting. I'm taking a little bit of my yellow and I'm putting it into another little circular part of my palette. I'm using this palette with the circles just because it can keep the wash together. Sometimes I use recycled palettes, but that's if I'm using thicker paint. If I'm using a wash, which is a little bit of paint and a lot of water, then I want to keep it within because then the water will just run out, okay? So look at what I'm doing. I take a brush, I take a bigger brush, and I'm putting water into it. Like that. Sometimes I take the little bit of container if you have a steady hand and pour a little water. But if you don't, just use your paintbrush and add water. Now look at this. This is what is called a wash. It's a little bit of pigment, which is paint. When I say pigment, I mean paint. A little bit of pigment and a lot of water. So it's watery, it's washy, and it's light. Very important to go light. You do not want to do a watercolor painting and go heavy right away. You go light, and then you keep building, and you get a little darker and a little darker for the darker areas. All right. So I have my wash of yellow, and I start. Where do I see yellows? I see yellow in the head, right in this area, and I go in. Now, don't be, now if you think that this yellow here is a little darker, that's fine. Go very light, we can then go over. Everything we're gonna go over again. This is like what is called in painting, you're under painting. So it's really light, and then you're going in. So I see a little bit of yellow around here, and I'm just filling in where I see yellows, okay? I didn't drawing every single one of my leaves. You don't have to do any of the leaves if it's confusing you, or you can do some of them. Remember, you can choose. You can just decide to do the branch, the bird, and maybe a few leaves or no leaves at all, okay? Right. So, some parts that are really a light green, a yellowish green, I will go yellow first, and then I will put my green over it. So you're really going in very light. Anywhere you see that's yellow, or maybe the underneath, it seems like it has a yellow undertone, you do that, okay? All right. I think that's it. So I have my yellow washed on to my brown pelican. You seeing that? And it's also on some of the leaves. Okay, let's do some of these other colors. So this is not, here's like grayish colors. Well, we can use a little black, and we can add in water to get your grays. Browns, if you have browns in your set, you can use different kind of browns in there. I'm going to show you how to mix a brown. Now, brown is all three of your primary colors. All three of your primary colors. So I'm going to mix a brown, and I'm going to wash it down, meaning add water to it to make it light and fill it in the other areas. Okay, so to make a brown, all three colors. I'm scooping from the original yellow, not the wash yellow, the thicker yellow. And my lighter color, always, I put more of my lighter color, right? I put it down in the middle. I'm going to mix my browns there. Let's wash out my brush, dab it on my paper towel, and I'm going to go in with a little bit of this red. Okay, and I put it here. Wash it out. I'm going to mix it together, but let's put our blue now. Tad bit of blue, even less blue. Now, when you're mixing a brown, you have to have patience, because sometimes it doesn't turn out to be the brown right away. You might get greens, you might get different colors, right? And then what you want to do is just keep adding other, a little bit of each one to see how it's going to give you that color. I'm starting to get some browns here. Looks like a purpley brown. I'm going to add some more of this yellow. Ooh, okay. So it's like a lighter brown here. So it's good to experiment. So even if you have brown, experiment and see. Can you make a brown? What type of brown? If you want a lighter brown, I took some away and I just put in some of that here and add a little yellow and have it like a lighter brown, right? Darker, you put a little more blue, etc. Washing out my brush. I didn't wash out my brush earlier. Remember to do that. Good. So I have my brown here. What am I going to do? I'm going to add some water to make it a wash. I'm actually going to use a lighter one. I made a lighter one with more yellow in it. This is the one I'm going to use. So look at all this water I added it into it. It's a wash. A wash. Good. And I decide I'm good. There's so much brown in these here. Let's go right through. Even the dark brown areas, let's fill it in with the light brown and we can get it darker after. So everywhere that I feel is brown, I go in. Look at how light that brown is. That's the underpainting, okay? Remember, it's going to get darker. And we're working. Do you notice how we're working? We're not just doing the head alone, fully done, the leaves fully done, the body fully done. We are thinking of color, and wherever that color is, we are going to put it in. I'm going to go with this brown of the, my screen is small, so I'm trying to show both. Right, look at how I do this brown. Now this brown here is a dark brown, but we want to put the light one first. Remember, always keep telling yourself that. Light to dark, light to dark. You'll go over with the dark parts. Light to dark. Look at the little texture of the feathers. I call it the hair. It's like a fur. Okay, this area of the beak, brown. I'm going to fill that whole thing in, right? Anywhere else you're seeing some browns, or maybe there are these little fruits that we see in the plants, we can do that too, right? Okay. Maybe some of this darker parts of the feathers, they'll be very dark brown. We'll go over it. It's just a way of filling it in. Look at how it's coming along. So you are just going from light, all areas, all through. This is a really good technique to use, all right? And remember, so light, and then we get darker. So let's go in with our dark browns. So I made two browns, remember, and I have a darker one here. I want it a little darker, so I'm going to add a little bit more. Now, don't get discouraged when this happens. I add a little more blue. It got more green. And then I added some red. It got kind of purplish. Don't get discouraged. You just keep adding. And then I went back in with the yellow and I got my brown. A little darker. So this takes practice. Of course, I said you can use the brown that you already have. But it's always nice to mix your own color too. So look at what I'm doing. See my dark brown? I'm adding water. It's a wash, but it's not as much of a wash as the other ones. Look at what I'm doing. So the dark part, look at it again. And I take, sometimes I go in with just the water alone. I wash out my brush. I go in with clean water. You see my water here? And I run it between these two colors, which is the dark and the light brown. See what happens there? Good. I go in with the dark. Wash out my brush and let it show, you know, like a transition. Seeing that? And as you go back, you could always go darker on the dark areas. But it's still a little watery. Not as watery as your initial wash, okay? Good. Nice. So as you can see, it's developing. All right, I have a little black here. For some parts, I can add it with my brown, or, add it with your brown, add some water for some of that dark area. I don't usually like to use the black flat or just thick like that. I mix it in with some of my brown, because these dark areas that appear black really are like a really dark brown, almost black, right? So where do I see my dark parts of the head? Right? So I'm going back into here. Now, if my brush is too big, I can go in with another brush. I think I'm going to do this detail brush. So you're paying attention, you're following the reproduction here. You're following the colored copy that you have. Look at how I put in my darks. I constantly go in with a little water to blend. Sometimes I shake out my brush. You hear me shaking out in the water. And I just put pure water. Not too heavy on the brush, but so that it can transition into a lighter. So you have it dark at the edge and then it gets lighter. I go in with my darks again. Right here by the beak is dark. So have you noticed that I am not using thick paint like when we do our acrylic drawing, paintings, etc. I'm not. Look at these lines I'm making just from the little bit of the brown that I had with a wet brush. You seeing that? Wow. So it takes time, but have fun with it. And let me tell you something about watercolor painting. Now, you can't go wrong once you start light. You must start light. You must start with a wash, a lot of water, and a little bit of pigment or color, okay? And you go in, layer, right? It dries, go in with the other layer, it's a little darker. Go in with the other layer, it's a little darker. But you're not covering up the areas that are light. So this area here is light, I'm leaving that light. So that was my first layer, right? That every time you go in with a layer doesn't mean you have to cover the entire thing. You want to leave the light areas. Okay, so you get the gist of it. I want to put in some of the greens for the leaves, and I want to show you how I'm going to mix my green. How do you mix green? And I know all of you know this, so I'm going to scoop some of the yellow. I'm going to put it in a separate little circular cubby area. I'm going to take the blue, just a little. You're putting less blue than you did yellow. And you mix. Ooh, look at that beautiful green, light green. And it's very similar to some of the greens I'm seeing here. And we're ready. You remember, green is made from yellow and blue. So that's why some of them are so light, I put that underneath layer of yellow. So that underneath layer of yellow will help. So I have my green, I'm going to go in with my water. You see how I'm dipping? I want you to see this. This is my water, I dip and add water into that. Now, once your water gets dirty, you want to change it. This still is not too dirty. This was my other one here. And I'm going to throw it out and get clean water. And this one I can still use. So now I have my green, my wash of green. Let's do this again. And we're going in. Now when I go in with my leaves, I still want to leave some of that yellow. I don't want to just cover the whole thing. It's nice when you see some of the yellows peeking in. So I'm just kind of doing it for some of them because some of the leaves are light and some are darker. You could actually fill in all green and then you can do the darker ones few. So some will have the light, and then some with the green. Okay? And it doesn't have to be exact, you know, you put in the leaves where you want. I didn't draw all my leaves, just some. All right, look at how it's coming out. Now, in your mind, it might be too light at first, but that's how you do watercolor. Light, and then you build, 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 and show more detail. Okay? But you still want to leave that freedom of how the water mixes with the paint and kind of carries it. It looks different. It's a very soft kind of technique. Good. I want to go into darker greens, so I'm taking a little blue and mixing it into my green wash. Look what happens. I took more blue, added my green wash. Look at what happens. Ooh, look at that green. It's gorgeous. Now, can you see it's almost like a puddle. Leave it like that. Allow it to do its thing. Wet on wet, right? So the light green before was wet, and then you go in with this and you allow it. It's the freedom of the water in the watercolor. And that's a technique. Look at that. And this is something you practice. Watercolor is not the easiest, only because some people just like to dive in too dark. Okay? But you want to take your time. The body of our brown pelican, it's light, but it's brown. And I'm just going to take a lot of water into my brown. Very, very light. Maybe add a little yellow to it. And then just go in. Cover the whole thing. And then we can go in when it's dry with the darker parts and maybe even lines. Right? But that's what I'm talking about. So your page should actually be filled. Right? You see how we're filling everything. We're not just doing all the leaves all together once, all the head, the this, the that. We are going from one area to the other. Decide what colors need to be where and do the colors all at once. Layer it, okay? So take your time, have fun with this. Understand what your watercolors are doing. Have a little piece of test paper on the side to test the colors or to see what happens when you go light to dark, okay? Good. So continue working, and I'm going to come back and show you the finish and talk about how you liked doing this wonderful project of watercolor birds. Okay, so I'm still working on mine, but I filled in more of it. And I want you to also, there's an important point I want you to know. Now, if you make a mistake, it's fine. If it is that you have, let's say, you were doing the leaves or whatever, and then you put too much water, the water like spilled into something. Let's say I had too much of this paint here, and it did like this. It's not dripping. Right? And you're like, oh no, I ruined it. Well, the great thing about watercolor is that all you do is take a piece of paper towel and dampen on it, and look at that, right? You take out the most. Then you take dry paper towel, dip it into clean water, and you could just dab it. So it takes off most of it. So please don't think if something happens, if the green gets somewhere on the outside or something spills or whatever, or drips, you could just take your paper towel and dab it. And do you know, there's some watercolor artists who love seeing the drips, so they allow their work to drip. They actually don't paint it flat. They paint it on an easel at an angle and it drips. Okay, so now you're going to make this your own. So even though this is the original, you could decide to leave the background white or to paint it any color you want. Okay, so I'm gonna put in a color. I decided I want blue. So I am using a larger brush, right? This is my brush. And I took some of this blue and put it here and added water to it, making my wash. Because I wanted just a light blue. I don't want it competing with my bird. It's really light. Okay? And you could wait till this dries, and then you can just go in with your background. And now your background doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be everywhere. It could be in some parts. And you remember how I showed you that sometimes it's okay for water, the watercolor, just to like puddle. You could just do it in some areas, a puddle. Or then you just take some plain water. I'm just going in plain water, and look what I do. I stretch it so it makes it lighter. So actually, my blues are darker at the top. And you see how I'm just going free? I'm not trying to paint a flat background at all. That's what watercolor is about. I'm not trying to paint a flat background. I want it to be kind of like a watery blue, just dabbed here and there. Right? It's not going to be, and the little pieces of the white paper coming through, that's beautiful as well. You can go in, if you want it to be a little darker, you add some more blue to your wash. You can decide maybe your blue is darker from one side to the other. Maybe the sun is coming from this side, so it's lighter, and this side is darker. And so I'm just making this side a little darker. That gives it a nice feel too. But I'm not doing the whole thing. I could just do that. If I think it's too dark, I wash out my brush and I just drag the color. So the main thing of watercolor is the water. The plenty water that is added to the pigment. Okay? Now as you can see, you see my pencil marks under there. So try and see if you could erase those pencils before, or if not, it could be there. As I said, some artists do that. Okay? So back to me. So there you have it. You have your watercolor bird. This is still wet, so this might drip when I do that. But that's okay. I can clean it up. Do you see it dripping? So have fun with your brown pelican. Let it dry. And then you can go darker in some areas, not the whole thing, because then it wouldn't be watercolor paint. It wouldn't be a watercolor painting anymore, okay? So have fun with it. I hope you learned so much about the Audubon birds, birds of America, and then you have done your own. So take your time, follow the steps, and enjoy. And I will see you for the next Exploring My City Through Art. Bye!